You're listening to the Platform Engineering Podcast, your expert guide to the fascinating world of platform engineering. Each episode brings you in-depth interviews with industry experts and professionals who break down the intricacies of platform architecture, cloud operations, and DevOps practices. From tool reviews to valuable lessons from real-world projects to insights about the best approaches and strategies, you can count on this show to provide you with expert knowledge that will truly elevate your own journey in the world of platform engineering.
Please remember that the opinions expressed in this interview are those of the guest and do not reflect the stance of the company they currently work for.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Platform Engineering Podcast. I'm your host, Cory O'Daniel. Today I've got with me Amey Patil. He's the head of platform engineering at Google Ads and Google Analytics. Amey, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, could you just tell us a little bit more about your background and your journey into platform engineering?
Absolutely. My current role actually is ensuring the productivity for various ad products. I'm the platform engineering lead for Google Ads and Google Analytics. And Google Ads actually is a little bit broader than just that. It's Search Ad 360, Display Video 360, Ads Creative Studio, Campaign Manager, as well as Google Analytics.
Wow.
So they all combined come under the ads portfolio of products. And within Google, the word platform engineering actually is used in the form of the term core or developer productivity or engineering productivity. So they all are used interchangeably. And the users of my products are essentially the in-house developers, the program managers, the product managers, UX, as well as the data scientists. Essentially anyone who's trying to push code or the product to the external customers. So that's my current work.
Awesome, very cool. And a question I've always had for people that work in platform engineers, especially at a company as big as Google that has a cloud product, do your teams tend to use your own cloud products, or are you using Google's internal systems?
So we use Google's internal systems. Actually, we do not use Google cloud products. We have our own mini version of GCP, or probably, dare I say, actually not even that mini. It's a massive scale infrastructure that's run in parallel to what is shared externally. A lot of the solutions that are available on GCP are actually developed and kind of tested within the Googlers, internally, and that's what makes for a great product on GCP as well. So we eventually use the same underlying tech, but we don't use literally the same APIs or the infrastructure beneath it.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool. So what I've seen a lot in the space, as far as the people that are getting into platform engineering, I'm seeing a lot of people that are kind of in the DevOps world, almost being rebranded as platform engineering, or trying to kind of take that next step in the DevOps maturity model, towards platform engineering. Internally with your teams, who do you see joining the platform engineering teams that you run? Are they coming from more of a DevOps background or more of an engineering background, a mix?
It's within Google, I would say it's been a mix. We have had folks who have actually been in pure development, people who have been the classic test engineering or quality assurance, DevOps, system admins. It's been a mix because the kind of work expected for this particular role within Google expects that kind of understanding of these various domains to be really effective in your team. So within my group, I have folks across the spectrum.
Very cool. And it sounds like a lot of people that have kind of been in that engineering customer service realm, right? Where they're already working with engineers as their customers.
Yeah, we've even had folks who have been data scientists in a way, because a lot of our products are very ML forward, and now in this particular day and age, AI forward. So people who understand ML ops are also in the team. And to understand ML ops, I've seen them have a background in actually ML development, either as a data scientist or even as an engineer who supported that data scientist as well. So it's actually quite a broad spread.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of what we do is platform engineers, and kind of what we've seen in the past so is it's evolved from this notion of DevOps and more towards platform engineering, is a lot more of these bespoke systems, right, that we've built internally at hundreds of companies around the globe are starting to become these core parts of platforms and being available in more open source tools. And so starting to see a lot of platform teams that are incorporating other engineering disciplines, right? Like, so they're bringing in security, they're bringing in compliance as a part of their platform. So it's pretty exciting to hear that like your team's actually bringing in data scientists and ML as a part of the internal platforms that you're building. Can you tell me a little bit more about maybe a project you've worked on recently where like data science and ML have had an impact on the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you definitely touched on a very important point. I probably spoke about skills and expertise, but even domains, as you correctly pointed out, security is something that we take very seriously within Google, and privacy obviously is one of the main tenets by which Google is trying to make every product out there. In one of my recent projects, we support serving of YouTube ads. As part of serving YouTube ads, we need to understand how the models have been created, what is the best way to serve those models as well. We have strict, latency expectations as well. And so it involved understanding when would we best be able to serve like a larger model or a smaller model based on if it needs to be a filtered based list of the recommendation engine or an ordered. So it actually requires that understanding of the product from a data science perspective as well, that what is the intent of that model when it's making a recommendation of the next video you need to be clicking, and what's the ad in the middle that needs to be served, which is personalized, relevant, contextual for the given times, and so on and so forth. So it could be someone as simple as saying, okay, let me give you the largest, but maybe in a particular country, those needs are not needed. So we need to understand the product, we need to understand the model, as well as then do the platform work around it to make that happen.
What kind of challenges? So I've seen like lots of different teams have challenges, like either bringing, older school operations engineers into platform engineering, where they've got to effectively, like they may have like a ton of Linux administration experience, right? Maybe they haven't done traditional software development outside of like scripting or whatnot, right? And that's kind of like the burden of coming from that side of the world. And I've seen a lot of engineers that maybe work very much on the product side of like an e-commerce platform, like moving onto the platform team, and they have a whole world of like cloud knowledge that they have to pick up very quickly to be really effective on that team. What are some of the biggest problems that ML and data scientists kind of run into when they're joining and contributing on a platform team?
Yeah, I feel in terms of adopting the mindset of a platform engineer for an ML based team, there are a few nuances. I mean, I think in essence the concepts are pretty much the same. You want to be able to bring up system, enable developers to do their development faster. In this case, enable the data scientists to be able to test out their model really quickly, be able to identify in case of the model's not behaving that the way they want to, if they have been enabled to get the data set that they need, able to filter it, root cause it, debug it as well, that hey, this is the data that I thought I was using for training, but it doesn't look similar to what I actually got. So you look at skew testing as well. So I think in terms of the concepts, the overall concepts, we need to still enable the data scientists to be able to develop their model, test their model, root cause if something's not going great, and then make it a smooth transition for it to go out in production. Same, like the same concepts of, canary and getting a feedback loop in, and then increasing the experimentation number from saying, I want to send this to 1% traffic or 5% traffic, depending on how the performance of the model goes. So if someone understands those base concepts, it's easy to apply that when evaluating the problem. But then once you go into actually building it out, then I guess there's a little bit of nuances over there where we're looking at, hey, we're not probably using an SEM to probably host the code. We're using like a model repository instead. So there are those technical differences, but the concepts are pretty much the same.
Yeah, and so
thankfully now with the advent of AI and the generation of code, people need to understand the overall concepts because the code generation is kind of taken care of in a way, so they can be less worried about this shift.
Yeah, do you think? I mean, you've been in the space for quite a while, right? You've been at Google for a while, and then previous to that, you're at VMware. You've obviously seen a lot of changes in like platforms over the past decade. With the recent like surge in AI and the attention that AI is getting, do you think this is a trend you'll see for a lot of platform teams, or is this something that's more specific to Google Ads that you're kind of incorporating data science and ML into the platform team?
Yeah, I've been getting this question a lot lately. I mean, Google has been an AI first company for the longest time, and AI in the context of AI is probably, ML, but maybe the generative AI using large language models probably is the little bit of an evolution that we see now. I have been super fascinated by this new shift in tech. I feel it's opened up unlimited possibilities. I see it make an impact on various stages of a product development lifecycle, all the way from ideation to launch. And I see it make an impact on every single surface touch point as well. And we're seeing that within Google Live today. Like every single team is thinking, in which way can Gen AI make a difference to my product or to my surface or to my users in a way that can make them more productive and see a lot more value in it. In the context of Google platform, in this case, actually entails a lot of stuff apart from the classic infrastructure as code. Like, for example, even documentation, generating what would be a PRD or a design doc, even generating UX mocks, code generation, obviously, then infrastructure as code, test frameworks, monitoring, debugging. I mean, in every single place, I'm seeing Gen AI make a meaningful change, a meaningful difference, not only in terms of making it easier to do the task, but also a lot more productive for the engineers, where they could do it faster and with some sense of higher quality as well.
Yeah, I've worked with quite a few companies like building out internal platforms, and I've talked to quite a few platform engineers over the years. And while it seems like you would assume that, like, all these companies like that are building these platform teams, like, we're all deploying software right to the cloud and containers, and you would kind of have this feeling that like a lot of the platforms are similar, like, right? And you're getting this with things like Kubernetes and whatnot. But when you talk to a lot of the different platform teams at different companies, especially when you see them in different industries, they have very different approaches to how they're doing platform engineering. Like sometimes it'll just be some stuff on top of Kubernetes, sometimes it'll be something home baked, right? And so, like, you're seeing a lot of these systems that are being developed that aren't as similar as one would assume from like sitting outside like the platform engineering world. Now, when it comes to AI, I feel like almost every decision point and feature that I'm building in a platform, or working on a team that's building on a platform, like, I feel like you could probably find a place for AI. How, like, for a team that's maybe a bit AI strapped, like they don't have, the budget of Google, or a whole team that can focus on building AI first products in their platforms. Like, how do you find the right place to start using AI, since it's so flexible and can kind of be used almost all over the stack?
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I don't think right now Gen AI specifically, or even AI in general, is cheap. It does require a fair amount of resources. I mean, in terms of cost of running the GPUs and TPUs, but also it requires a skill set of engineers in the team who need to be able to capitalize on that, on those kind of capabilities. It's a luxury that Google has provided many of its teams, and I feel thankful for it. I do see I do see a lot of this being commoditized soon. I mean, we see, I don't know, thousands of startups, if not tens of thousands of startups, are already solving smaller problems and selling it as a service, very similar to, and this is a parallel I kind of draw to when I remember when cloud became what it was in early 2000 or 1990s. It's like, hey, apart from Salesforce, Amazon, Google, who else could bring up their own cloud? And then over a period of time, we figured out there has been, like, duopoly, or like three or four companies who have established what the base infrastructure is, and then there are multiple product teams who are bringing down the cost by solving smaller problems at scale, and then those services are made available. So I see a very similar trend that may play out for AI as well. You may have a few players who may become the top three or top four in that overall space, but then you'll see a lot of people who are building on top of it, which may be sold at a lower price just because of the smaller value, or the small sliver of vertical that they're targeting, then eventually making it accessible for the teams who cannot be consuming it today.
Yeah. And before we hit record, you'd mentioned that your team had worked recently using generative AI as a part of migrating a legacy code base. Could you dive a bit deeper into some of the lessons learned there with using AI to
Yeah,
refactor legacy code? I think
yeah,
that
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think so I'll just paint a picture of what we need to do. Ads is like a 20 or 22-year-old business now. You can imagine there is tons of code in tens of millions or maybe more than that lines of code, and plenty of it's legacy. We have engineers who have moved out, and it's a massive complex system. And when I'm saying complex, I'm probably underestimating or I'm not able to sell it enough of how complex it really is. It requires that constant maintenance of keeping it up to date, especially to match the current trends. We have tons of competition in this space, and for ads to be able to deliver at the pace at which it needs to be successful at, it needs to keep upgrading its tech. So one of those projects was migrating our query and storage layers, which again was millions of lines of code. And in terms of timing of the project, GenAI really had picked up steam, and we decided maybe this time we give this a go as compared to looking at smaller problems like bug to code and so on and so forth. So that was the problem statement at hand. We had to move the query and storage layer of the Google Ads underlying system of the buy side, and everything in the beginning, the initial experiments, everyone was only saying, wow, the jaws were dropping down. Really, it could generate this, it could generate that. But these were all, as I was saying, these are all small proof of concepts, small experiments. As we start to really put it out there for the entire migration, that's when the real challenges came out. And we realized it's not all magic after all. So one of the main things that I felt was that AI needs scaffolding. There are no miracles. It can chew through the legacy code base and spit out. I mean, it cannot chew out the legacy code base and spit out perfectly working code. It excels at identifying patterns and automating these tasks, but there are guardrails that are needed to ensure that it's doing what it should. And it does require a fair amount of human oversight. And the GenAI requires a fair amount of supportive tooling around it to make that happen. So for example, we can tell GenAI, look at this particular file and say, move this from this to this, given this is the criteria of the migration. However, it may have basic syntactical errors. It may not follow the code style that Google has for its particular code base. It needs to look at the linters. It needs to look at it needs to look at the correct build imports. These are not something that you would directly associate with the code generation, but these are all supplemental things needed to make the code actually work, or to actually get it approved into the code base. So you need to write a fair amount of small external tooling alongside, which ensures the other pieces also function. So that was one of the biggest things. AI probably played, in my opinion, 25% of the generation piece, and the 75% around it was the tooling which made that happen. And that's where the platform engineers really come in, because they can say, okay, check my build file, check my environment. Will this code work on this environment in terms of versioning, and so on and so forth. The second one is garbage in, garbage out. I mean, at the highest level, GenAI is a probabilistic way of creating the next character. So if the legacy code wasn't good to begin with and it had bugs, you're going to carry forward the bugs as well. You would think as part of migrating, you would clean up a lot of your stuff, but you may also carry forward some of the issues. So we don't want that to happen. It's not just going from stack A to stack B, but stack B needs to be performant, like more performant, less buggy, cleaner, more scalable, and everything, and all the good stuff around it. And eventually, I mean, there is also the verification piece. We can migrate the code, but we need to also migrate the test cases now. So if you think about the complexity of the migration now, the generation is on generated code. We need to generate tests against generated code, which may or may not, give out the output that we would really like. And as you can imagine, in quality assurance or testing, there's a little bit of creativity involved, where we're trying to use our human minds to figure out how can we really break the system. It's not about writing lines of code to achieve point A to point B. It's also figuring out what should the point A to point B distance or route really look like. So these were some of the challenges that we had to really pass through to make this project a success. We aren't fully there yet, but we have made substantial progress, a lot of good learnings for the entire group.
Yeah, I mean, I assume moving faster than just a bunch of people refactoring it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely showing a lot of value in terms of savings. I mean, once everything really comes together, the entire orchestrator comes together, we would be able to make a lot of change. It's very similar to, back in the day we had manual QA, and then we had 100 test engineers to do testing on the website, and then came Selenium, and then you could do front end testing, and suddenly the same thing could be done by 10. So very similar over here, that the code generation, which would take, let's say, 15 engineers to do over a period of 2 years, can now be done by 3 or 4. It'll take that initial 6 months to get the system to that point where we can now click through and then run and actually run with it. Similar to automation, where you would put in the time to build the framework, write the test cases, and then the CI pipelines can really run the test on a frequency that it is valuable for the product. And then you can push out your product on a multiple times a day or multiple times a week cadence that you would prefer.
Yeah, it's interesting that you pointed out that you kind of carry the bugs forward, right? Because I think that's one of the interesting things in Gen AI around code is, it's one thing to have the Gen AI see maybe an actual like software bug, right? Like an off by one error, right? Or, going through a loop and starting at one instead of starting at zero, right? Versus business logic, which it doesn't necessarily understand the context of, right? Like we've got these models that are trained on just mountains of code, but they're not trained on why, right? Like the context between two get diffs, or like maybe this thing that very much looks like a bug is an aspect of this business, right? Like I worked for an e-commerce company in the past where you could only put one item in the shopping cart, right? And like that, like any other e-commerce system, you'd be like something's broken, but like that was the way that the product worked, right? And so that is pretty interesting. Like, have you seen anything yet in like the AI space? I don't know if you can share this, if it's internal stuff, but like where the context, not just like the code that's being analyzed, but like the context, like the history of like the Git commits, or where you can put in some of the business requirements as well to help generate better code, not just the code, but also like taking in like the business's aspects. Is there anybody that's kind of working on that today or that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I was referring to in the beginning, Google has its own world of infrastructure. In that context, we have our own source control technology as well. We have our own Bitbucket equivalent, or GitHub equivalent. So we do have a fair amount of data revolving around what looks like readable code, what looks like the style guide that we would want to have in case someone writes a particular algorithm, if it's efficient, because we have comments on the PRs and the CLs. So we do have the information. However, to your point again, the information is like a lot and it is unlabeled. That's the whole point of LLM. So I think with time you'll be able to refine it further and make it much more valuable. This is a discussion right now. If you follow any of these tech papers people are submitting, is about giving additional context to say, hey, when I am writing a test case for this particular piece of code, I also want you to evaluate alongside the code my test document, my PRD as well, because it requires all three in the mix to generate a meaningful test case. So I think it's not as good as we would like for it to be today, but things have been changing at a pace that I've not seen before. I mean, there are so many minds on it, and just because of access of infrastructure, time, energy, I wouldn't be surprised if it's getting solved live right now. Someone sitting somewhere and just figuring it out.
Yeah. What do you think, like as far as like traditional people that you'd see on a platform team, operations, software developers, like with how fast AI is moving, like what implications do you think there are for the skill sets of those traditional platform team members? And how should those engineers and teams kind of prepare themselves for the changes that's coming with Gen AI?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Gen AI is definitely poised to reshape the landscape of platform engineering, and the skills that required will need to evolve alongside it. I think coding, which has been a highlight for the last 20, 25 years or even longer, I don't think that would be the focus so much in the future. I think focus would be on problem framing. I think the code generation piece will get a lot more refined with time. So the premium will be on defining the problem effectively and then being able to understand what would be the clear instruction given that problem and the output we want to get out of it. So I think the human piece would still be required, but I think the mentality would need to shift from, hey, would I be able to code it as compared to what needs to be done, assuming that the code will just happen. And it won't replace human judgment. So I think that overall judgment and the overall human in the loop aspect will still stay. And I think there will be more of a need to collaborate across disciplines. They would need to work with the data scientists, domain experts. So we would need to have a much more broader understanding of the overall problem that's at hand. And I think outside of tech, they would need to embrace continuous learning. I think the curiosity needs to be there and an open mind that, hey, there is something that can be done differently. And essentially shifting from the code-centric mindset to the system mindset. There is, of course, value in upskilling yourself with, data and AI fundamentals. I think, there is a slew of new jargon and acronyms right now. I don't suggest, obviously, becoming an expert in all of them, but, if you're a platform engineer, you don't know what CI is, I think that's a problem. So very similarly, you need to know what RAG is, and, you need to understand what, concepts around LLMs also are.
Effectively, we need to start becoming familiar with like the terms and potentially the operating models of those, but we don't necessarily have to go back to uni for more math classes, right?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. In fact, if I recollect correctly, I think it's, Sam Altman, or even even the folks in I feel there are going to be folks who would be needed to solve those kind of problems, but not everyone's going to be building that. No, not everyone needs to know how Git functions, but you need to know how, what does Git do. So yeah. I think it's a very similar place over here. When I saw Git, it was magic for me that, multi-GB size, repositories can be condensed into a single character, key. So, but I don't know how it did it, but I can still make a lot of progress from it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so on the other side of the world from AI is obviously the people that are building it, right? And the platform teams. So these teams are going to be around for quite a while, it sounds like, right? We're going to have to run these AI systems. We're going to be building software on top of them. One of the things I think with AI, I feel like there's a lot of, I don't think it will in the long term. I think it's probably going to make us more efficient engineers. And if anything, like given corporations, us progressing faster means more money for businesses. So I don't fear AI in the long run. I see it as like a tool that I'll be using, but we do have all these teammates that we work with. And what's interesting with DevOps is I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Dora report, but like the Dora report over the past few years hasn't looked great. Like the last Dora report is like 50% of people that responded, like that were focused on DevOps, were still just struggling to get to that high level maturity where you could start to do platform engineering and really like reap the benefits. You've managed high performance teams throughout your career at VMware, Cisco, at Google. Like what are the most common challenges for platform teams at scale? And how do you address those problems to maintain productivity and morale, right? I feel like we're always drowning in tools to adopt. And now there's just like a whole swath of them coming at us from the world of AI. So would love to know, what are the most common challenges you see there in managing those teams?
Yeah, I think, I've got multiple answers actually I want to share on this. Is that one is, yes, things are evolving really quickly. So there's lots of new stuff. I also look at that as a very positive sign. I always love if there is innovation or something new coming in the industry that I am in, which means people are interested and people are developing. I don't know if in the railworks or in the coal and mining, there's a lot of innovation happening, and you can imagine the industry stagnating. So I've always looked at that as a very positive sign for my industry, that people are focusing on it and building stuff on top of it. It gives us an opportunity to learn and upskill ourselves. And to your point about people being nervous about losing the jobs, I agree with you. I don't see Gen AI our jobs. It is an enabler. It makes us empowered to solve a higher degree, like a higher caliber problem, which was not possible before. So it depends on how well do we really take that challenge thrown our way. I mean, with the additional time that we are going to get by these tools, it'll give us some more creative window for coming up with a problem that we could not think about just because we were short on time, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a mindset that anyone in tech or anyone in any industry actually should need to look at in terms of how, if there's any disruption coming in, how should they embrace that, how should they embrace that disruption, and basically capitalize on it by adopting and upskilling themselves. So within my teams, we definitely face feature fatigue, where because of these new tools, we've got people like, hey, can you implement this? Can you build a tool for making that particular feature possible? And there's always a new shiny feature or a tool to build or to adopt. But how we combat it is we within our scope, we put prioritization at the top. We are very ruthless with what we want to take on. As with almost every company, we have our own ratios. I'll not speak about Google, but the general industry number is usually essentially 10:1. For every 10 developers, you have one platform engineer per se. So we need to be very mindful about what we're taking on to ensure that we are delivering forward, and we also chunk our workload. We make sure that we're making small incremental changes, something that adds value. People feel that they have got things in control. We also celebrate those victories along the way, not just the big milestones, not the final deployment, but the milestones along the way. And we are also not afraid to use the word no. I think saying no is powerful. If it doesn't align with the priorities, we are very clear with our communication with our partners and our consumers of the solutions we build as to why we're not making a decision today, or why we're making a decision today of not to build it. And then probably carving out, as I said, with the time and efficiency gains that we had made, carving out time for innovation so that people take those new tools that are available, which we said no to, but also learn about them so that when the absolute need does arise, they are in a position that they can really jump off from. So I think, ruthless prioritization, small iterative work, being comfortable to say no, and protecting time for innovation would be key ways for any leader for their platform engineering team or any tech team to embrace these kind of disruptions in their particular space.
Yeah, I think two things you said there that I think are pretty key is is celebrating those milestones. Like, I feel like so many teams get caught up in we can't wait to celebrate the big win. And sometimes that win doesn't come, right? But you might have gotten 80% of the way there, and not reflecting on those milestones where you have seen progress on the way to where you're trying to get to. I think that is really key for morale, keeping employees enthusiastic about what they're working on. The really interesting thing you said there is no, and is being able to say no. And I feel like I've seen so many teams struggle with that, right? Especially on platform teams. What's interesting is, when you look at let's say you got a team of 20 developers working on an e-commerce platform. There may be a number of people that are working on that platform that they don't really care about what the product's selling, right? They're writing software. When you meet platform engineers always seem very excited about what they do, right? They're building software for software developers. It's their people, yeah. Right? And that is a very hard group to say no to, right? Because you're already in a role that's very much like a service role. You're working on a product that you're excited about with a customer that you truly understand. Yeah. What are some tips for being able to say no to a new feature or a new tool, and how do you handle that internally at Google?
Yeah, I mean, I think the onus of saying no comes both from the leader as well as the team that leader is leading. I think there needs to be psychological safety within that group where people can have candid conversations about the value of a particular feature or product asked from their partners or from their users. So I think that is the number one thing, I think, which will allow for that outcome to begin with. But there needs to be some points where we need to anchor towards what is the goal that we are solving for. I mean, almost every business, every team, we are working towards certain outcomes, certain goals, And say, for example, if there is a particular group within my organization who's focusing on making things a lot more reliable, if that doesn't fit the agenda of making that particular product reliable, probably for that particular sequence, it just doesn't fit. So defining clear North Stars clears out the mind on how they can evaluate the problem at hand. And I think we need to also, sometimes I see platform engineers have the temptation to first find the how and then the why or what. And I think that always plays against them because they feel they've discovered, oh, like, hey, I've got Terraform. And then let's say there is a new solution, which is, I don't know, Bottle. And they're like, oh, Bottle looks cooler. Let me implement Bottle and see where all can I not use Terraform moving forward. So that takes away from the North Star, the anchor that everyone's moving towards. So I think the psychological safety within the team to speak their mind and having clarity on the goal that we're working towards will make those kind of decisions easier. Then from there, I think Google specifically, or even in my past companies, data should be your fuel. I mean, curiosity is a spark that needs to consume that data and then come up with an outcome, and use data alongside determining why this is adding or not adding enough value that the teams should be spending the amount of energy that they are on building that particular piece. So I think a combination of these three.
What you were saying earlier with almost like the new shiny baubles that can kind of distract you from the work at hand, like a new tool, right? I'm not sure if you follow Reddit DevOps subreddit, but it's funny. Like, I feel like every couple of days I see either somebody on one of the two sides of the fence. Somebody is like, we've got too many tools, we are using everything, and like we can't, like we just have so much stuff that we can't figure out how to do anything anymore. And then teams that are like, we haven't had any new tooling in forever, and I would love to be able to like start like bringing in new tools into my organization. And I feel like it's funny. It's like seeing both of these complaints at the same time in like the same forum is always very funny to me. And I think like one of the key things you kind of hit on there is like, not just like that you can use the tool or that the tool exists, but like why and what value does it bring to the team? I think it's the really, really key things there.
Yeah. Why and what value, and at that time specifically, because sometimes, I think, let's say, for example, if someone's using TypeScript and they want to move to, let's say, Dart or JavaScript, maybe there is value in migrating it and maybe it should be done. But is it worth that migration today, given everything's already pretty much running? And it may add, let's say, I don't know, X amount of productivity to the entire group. But what is the opportunity cost then that we actually let go? So I think the timing piece of it digs into the opportunity cost that people probably sometimes don't evaluate as well. Where else would we be able to put in the time?
Yeah, and I feel like opportunity cost is one of those things that it can be very hard to think about, right? Especially if like you're not coming from like a very business mindset, right? Like you're working with these tools all day in, day out, you're building features, like why not this one? And like being able to bring it back to that and like kind of embodying that idea with your team to make them be thinking about like what is like the opportunity cost of doing this right now, I think is really, really important to making sure that you're doing the right things for your product and that you're doing them in the correct order. Right? So with teams like yours, especially on products like Google Ads that are high revenue products, how do you foster a culture of innovation within these teams where you have something it's working well, it's generating revenue, like we want to continue to innovate it, we want to make it faster, we want to make it cooler, we want to make it generate more revenue? Like, how do you do innovation when you have a product like Google Ads that is just so like high in usage and such a revenue driver for the business?
Yes, Google Ads, just because of the percentage of revenue it brings to Google and the data it works with, the number of engineers impacted, it is a high pressure group. I always say this though, that innovation and pressure can be best friends and not sworn enemies. In fact, I feel many times innovation comes from a high pressure situation as well. So in terms of how we cultivate innovation, how we ensure that we are progressing along, I think the first mindset thing would be embracing calculated risks. I feel there has to be a risk involved, but how much can you pad it to ensure that it's calculated? So for example, do you have smart fails when things get deployed, and if it doesn't work, can it roll back automatically? Can it scale by itself? So creating a safe space to experiment conceptually and also technically allows for innovation and development to happen much more fluently within the Google Ads infrastructure. Thankfully, that kind of setup is there, so people feel comfortable to make changes at the frequency and scale at which Google functions. And I think cross-pollination is key over here. I think the innovation, or at least large innovations, happen at the cross-section of multiple disciplines. So if the platform engineering teams do not work in silos, they connect with their partners, they connect with the data scientists, and then there are multiple minds looking at the problem from a different perspective. Ensures that the idea or the development or the project that is being carved out is a much more foolproof or thought out solution, which builds a lot more confidence when we're taking on something that's high risk. There is also, as I was speaking about earlier, using data as well as having psychological safety to feel comfortable and say when things are failing. People are nervous sometimes to say, hey, I kind of messed up and it's actually not working out. People continue doing it because they don't want to look like they failed, and that's a recipe for a much bigger or a much larger disaster. So building that kind of culture within the group where people are comfortable and in fact eager to share their failures early up so that other people do not make the same missteps also goes a long way when we are dealing with these high revenue, high pressure situations where information is shared quickly and frequently within the team members that are solving the problem, but also externally as well. And then embracing all of these aspects, I think, will essentially harden the team over a period of time. Then as the organizations mature, the confidence rises, and then from there these situations feel less pressure like, and then it's business as usual from there. So I would imagine a brand new team facing these challenges, and these are some of the techniques they could probably use. Hopefully that the attrition and the team stick together for a longer period of time. The attrition's low and the team sticks together, and you'll end up having a much more stronger team, confident team, making a larger impact.
Awesome, thank you for that. How big is the Google Ads platform engineering team?
I would say it's in the I'm not sure I can be giving out exact numbers, but it's in the hundreds.
Oh wow, just for the platform engineering team.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool, very cool.
And that's a small section of it. I mean, we do have some specialized platforms which have their own specialized engineers for those platforms as well.
Yeah, and so with your teams, like, let's say a team member finds a new tool that they think is a good fit, and it's the right time. Like, do individual team members have the ability to just kind of bring that in and start using it, or do you have like a formal like RFC process that like your platform engineering teams kind of look at the tools before deciding to move forward?
Yeah. As you ask this question, it reminds me of my first day at Google, and when I walked in, and it felt less of a company, it felt more like a university campus. And I was like, hey, this already feels very different. I recollect that why are folks playing volleyball in the middle of the day? And it's got a very chill vibe. And I thought maybe it's just the non-work related pieces that are very university-like. But as I got into the system and I saw how Google as a company functioned, I was blown away by how grassrootsy it is. And actually, it's a double-edged sword, because we see similar competing products that Google pushes out. For example, we had Google Chat and Google Hangouts. Then we had Google Meet, all solving nearly the same problem, but not quite a single unified product. And we can compare that with an Apple, where they have this grand ecosystem strategy where if something has to come out, a product which goes externally, it needs to be vetted across the entire ecosystem. Google clearly doesn't function that way. And if you apply that blueprint of how Google approaches external facing products, you can see how much of an explosion it is when you look at internal products where there are no external users involved. We do encourage a lot of our engineers to think and innovate and solve a problem that no one solved. And many times you'll see duplication. But that's a risk we're willing to take as a company because we feel we'll find the diamond once in a while. That will be totally worth it. So engineers are encouraged to innovate, and now to make that innovation really land, they need to put on multiple hats. So a platform engineering in Google, or at least in Google Ads, essentially is like a CEO. They're like, hey, I've got a great product idea, but it doesn't stop there. You need to figure out your strategy or how you're going to get adoption, because people are already using a similar tech and they want you to move to yours. So why would a user switch? So you need to have a sales pitch in a way. You need to figure out your growth strategy. You need to figure out people who will contribute. So there is some kind of recruitment involved. You can get 20%ers to participate if you are not a manager who can fund the project, but you're really convinced about your idea. So we have an internal job portal where people are saying that, hey, I've got this great idea. I think it's going to bring big impact to the product, and I would need some help. So people can be kind of recruited for the 20% project. So it's a very unique company, at least from the companies that I've been in. I've been in 7 companies in the past. I've never seen that kind of a style where anyone from an L2, L3 engineer, which is the entry level engineer, all the way up to the VP, everyone feels empowered to come up with a solution to a problem that they feel is the best way to be solved, and then they just go do it.
That was awesome. I love that. So, with all of your experience in platforms, what I'd be curious is, I feel like the definition of like platform engineering is kind of starting to formalize over the past year or so. In like the traditional definition of platform engineering, like what do you think is missing that we need to start incorporating into platforms, whether they're at Google, whether they're platforms that we're buying like different passes, or whether they're the platforms that we're building internally at other organizations on top of Kubernetes or on top of the clouds directly? Like what is missing from platform engineering today that you think is going to be important in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think compared to the classic platform engineering, I feel it needs to understand that the platform isn't really just limited to code, infrastructure, deployment, monitoring, at least within Google and in VMware when I was part of it, mainly in Google. A developer probably spends, I don't know, I'm just throwing a number, I feel I'm in the range though, approximately 15 to 20% of active code authoring time. The amount of time they're actively coding is like 20-25%. Everything beyond that probably could be conversations, discussions, there could be bug evaluations, there could be and like an on-call, like a debugging piece that needs to be done. There needs to be some kind of a report of, let's say, an incident that happened in production, and you need to justify how did that bug get to production. So there's documentation writing. That's all required to make the product successful, which depends on an underlying platform. Now, the platform in this case now suddenly explodes beyond an IDE, a source control manager, a Kubernetes, like the system. It starts looking at, let's say, documentation, start looking at approval systems, it will start looking at an issue tracker. And I feel if platform engineering teams look at their entire ecosystem of tools, all surfaces that teams use to make their product successful, that actually is the platform. So that is one. I feel that is something that they need to think about, because if at all I get a page from one particular incident that happened in production and I'm responding to it, I need to be able to tie that incident to some kind of CL, figure out my test cases that ran around with them. I need to have a debugging journey over there. Then from there, I need to do probably code authoring, but the review process is over there. So you can imagine the number of surfaces that they have bounced across, and that context needs to keep flowing. So that ecosystem needs to be a little bit broader. That's one. And I think then the second aspect would be when they are building solutions, this is on a very different tangent. I've noticed that the primary focus has always been either speed or quality. I can get you to make you do your stuff faster, or I can make you do it with higher quality. And just because of the fact that we feel that we can cut some corners, we don't focus on ease. We are saying, okay, can I make this a better experience? We feel that, oh, the users are an internal engineer sitting right next to me. I think, let me just get what I have right now there. But they're not thinking from a true product mindset that,
Yeah.
hey, it is not just about the speed, it's about also repeatability, you coming back, having a pleasurable experience so that you want to use the product more. Because if it's a really painful tool to use, you may not use it as frequently, and then eventually it beats the entire purpose. So I think the additional dimension of thinking from an interaction perspective, from an ease perspective, will also, make a platform engineering team a lot more successful. And I feel that's currently missing in many teams.
And that's that bit right there where it's like your user's sitting 5 desks down from you, right? Like you have lunch with them, but you don't typically think of them as the customer that you never see that runs their credit card through Stripe. You do when you're selling a business, right? And like and the way you present your product is probably very different in those two scenarios. But DevX is king, right? Like, I mean, you're going to get users internally on your systems. They're going to love or hate those systems. And if they love them, you're probably going to get a lot more use and a lot more useful feedback than if somebody's like, I don't want to use this thing.
To the desk and saying, hey, by the way, click here, just to get them onboarded really quickly. So, you already realize that the onboarding experience is poor and you kind of cut short certain aspects. So when there is someone who's not in the room, the process becomes really painful. So yeah, you can see that mindset really play out when you do not know who your user is.
Technical skills. What personal attributes do you believe have contributed most to your success in leading platform engineering teams?
I think in general, curiosity. I think curiosity is something I think it's fundamental to success, especially in these changing times. And curiosity in terms of why is this functioning the way it has been functioning for the longest time? Or why do we need to do this particular thing? Why is this particular trick needed and why could it not be solved in the base aspect? So I think the why behind a lot of questions is something that people should use a lot more often and not take things for, and not assume that, hey, this was built by the architect in the group, so it must have been a really thought out solution and this is what it is. So I think having the comfort to ask a question and to be curious to begin with. And then finally, curiosity then fuels empathy, because once you are curious, then you go down that rabbit hole of figuring out the why, you connect with the people, and then you empathize with the problem. Actually, I really had to do this really quick, and so I had taken this corner over there. Or, hey, this particular server with this particular chip is not best designed to solve these kind of problems. At least that was what the case was 5 years back, is if there is a new chip now, maybe the answer may be a little bit different. So you understand the thought process that maybe it's not only from the dimension that you're probably thinking, but probably some other aspect that you haven't thought about. So I think curiosity and empathy together, I think has helped me do my work as a platform engineering lead for a while.
And that's interesting. That's really interesting because like curiosity and empathy, right? Like that leads to good culture. Right. And I feel like that's what, when you see a lot of organizations that kind of like traditionally struggle with DevOps, like it's rooted in just not nailing that culture. Right. And like not internally, like getting that initiative like born and moved forward. And maybe we just need a lot more empathy to get us there.
I think once people start becoming a lot more empathetic, you'll see other behaviors come into picture. Like, for example, it may, some teams have seen this happen. They're like, oh, this doesn't come under my jurisdiction, or this is not my work. But as you start empathizing, then the work is not the discussion, the problem is the discussion. So you're like, okay, but it's still our problem. So you start tackling the problem, and that mindset shift happens then, and then effectively teams become a lot more effective.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're coming up on time. I really appreciate having you on the show today. I just one last question for you. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I've been doing a poor job of keeping a good social presence compared to the number of people that are doing it nowadays. I think LinkedIn would be my best way to connect. I don't post a lot over there, but if at all, LinkedIn would be the best way.
Awesome. Amey, thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciated having you on and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks a lot, Cory. I really had a great conversation. I really like the questions. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Platform Engineering Podcast. Have a topic you would love to learn more about? Let us know at Cory@massdriver.cloud. That's CORY@MASSDRIVER.cloud. Catch you on the next one.